from my team here. Shelley Gehring and Emma McGurran and Renee Santiago, as well as our director, Christine Medor, and my colleague, Karsten Snow Eichelberg. So we're all here. This is funded in part by the Eastern Bank Foundation through a grant that we got with them. It's the second year in a row we've had this training, and we're so happy to be back. So there's a few housekeeping items. Put any questions or comments in the chat, and we're going to stop periodically and have the speakers or us answer them. We'll do the best we can to answer some as we go along. Please keep yourself muted during the training. Remember to log CM credits if you're looking for those. And if you'd like to use the closed captions, you can do so in the bottom toolbar. Most importantly, when you leave this meeting, a screen will pop up to take you to a feedback form. Please fill it out. And today we have a big, long session, but I personally think it's a really important one. It's on understanding the local ecosystem that interacts with affordable housing. So most of you are either housing advocates or you're involved with a city or town, but as you all know, within any municipal government, we have 351 of them here in Massachusetts. There are numerous boards, committees, officials, leaders, not to mention the community that you're interacting with when you want to get an affordable housing project done. So this is the whole goal here is Judi Barrett, the founder and director of Barrett Planning Group, is going to be providing an overview of that whole municipal structure, knowing that it's a little different from town to town. And then we have two amazing speakers that are going to talk about specific projects from different standpoints. Matt Zahler is the president of MPZ Development, and he's going to be talking from a developer standpoint about a project that his firm worked on in Templeton. And then Shaun Suhoski, who's the town manager in the town of Athol, he's had a lot of experience in other communities too, is going to talk about a project that was built there. So that's really it. I'm going to go on mute and switch it over to welcome Judi Barrett, our first speaker.
Thank you, Katie. Can you all see those slides? That's the beginning slide. Super. So thank you, MHP, for inviting me to join this. I did this last year. I loved it. It was great fun, and it's just wonderful to see so many people signed up for this session. So kind of a little overview of what I'm going to talk about is understanding how local governments are organized, how they function, kind of who does what. And as Katie said, these things do vary somewhat from community to community. I saw a few people signing on to this meeting who had years and years of local government experience too, who can probably tell you their own war stories. But I think the real kind of critical thing to understand is that everybody's got a role in this process. When there are permits required, which there always are for development, the permitting timelines don't always align well. It's the bane of a developer's existence. Understanding that some aspects of regulation are purely local, some are state, and sort of knowing when it is that a local code may exceed what the state or differ from what the state requires. My experience working in cities and towns, we kind of work all over New England, is that the degree of communication from town to town varies significantly. And when there's great communication, all of this just works so well. And when the communication is fractured, or in very small towns where like everybody's a volunteer and people are really busy, it sometimes really has nothing to do with a lack of cooperation, but just time. Understanding what happens sort of at a departmental level versus with the boards and commissions, understanding kind of where the developer's coming from and what they need, and how to just bring kind of housing knowledge to your project. That's kind of the goal of what this presentation is about. So this picture of the maze is kind of what it feels like for a lot of people entering the permitting process or any kind of development. And I think the challenge is understanding how to get from the beginning to the end. The typical players in any affordable housing project that has any sort of municipal sponsorship or support, there'll be somewhere along the way the select board and or the mayor will be involved. The planning board is almost always involved. If your project requires a comprehensive permit for under Chapter 40B or a special permit, the zoning board of appeals may be involved. The planning board could also be the special permit granting authority, because only in Massachusetts do we have multiple special permit granting authorities. It just doesn't work this way in other states. If there's a municipally sponsored affordable housing development, which I think is a lot of what we're looking at in this session, there's probably going to be an affordable housing trust. It may be a housing partnership. Over time, I think most communities have kind of consolidated those two, but I still work in towns that have both. If you're fortunate to have a community preservation committee and have CPA funds to work with, CPA committee may be involved at some point. Conservation Commission, the Board of Health, Historical Commission, and all these different groups have a role. I'm going to talk more in a little bit later in this presentation about exactly what they do. But all of these groups at some point are likely going to have a role to play. So forming a relationship with them and understanding the constraints under which they work, and the opportunities to collaborate it's just really important. There are some other players that you may see depending upon the town that you work in. Some communities have a neighborhood conservation district commission or board that may have a role to play. It's not common, but it could be the case. More commonly, I see a design review board that may have a role in reviewing project design. Some communities have a special stormwater committee, and other communities, stormwater is handled by the Conservation Commission, and still others, planning board. So even that varies. And a few communities I've worked in have a site plan review committee instead of a planning board handling that function. So kind of understanding who does what in your town just is really important. In addition to those volunteer boards and officials, there are professional staff. At least in most communities, you'll find some of these roles, if not all of them. There will be a planning department. Most towns today have a town planner, but not everybody does. But the planning board will at least have an admin assistant. So getting to know that person and understanding the board schedule matters. A town manager or a town administrator, those roles are different. They're not really the same, although sometimes it's a little bit difficult to distinguish the two. A building department, where a building commissioner, a building inspector is someone you're going to want to know very early on, because often for zoning interpretation, that's the person you need to be speaking with. If you have a conservation agent or administrator who's working closely with the Conservation Commission, they can really help you understand how the commission operates, what the timelines are, if there's a local wetlands bylaw, how that works. A health agent involved with wastewater disposal, a town engineer. You may or may not have one, but if you do, you're going to want to get to know that person as well. A public works department that knows the sort of the road standards for the town. And then just the administrative assistants to all the various boards that I referred to previously. They're the ones who often really are sort of handling the scheduling for the boards. They know when the boards meet. They know what timelines the boards need material for in advance. So there's just a whole lot of people. And the good thing is that there's a whole lot of people who can help you usually. The tough part is if you're not accustomed to working with some of these folks, it can be a bit of a challenge to sort of map who you need to be dealing with next. Often there might be a state agency involved as well, and understanding how to work with them. The Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, as many of you probably know, has a unique role in helping communities place on the Chapter 40B subsidized housing inventory units that are created outside the comprehensive permit process, such as through a local inclusionary zoning bylaw or ordinance, or units created with CPA funds, or some way that the locality played a unique and decisive role in getting a unit created. EOHLC is the agency that's going to handle that. They also, of course, are a subsidizing agency. Mass housing could be involved. MHP could be involved, Mass Development. I mean, these are all different agencies that may get involved in a project. The Department of Environmental Protection isn't always involved, but if there's an appeal of a Conservation Commission decision or something like that, DEP would be handling that. There may be natural heritage issues on a site. I will just say in general, it's a good idea to try to avoid those sorts of natural constraints when you can. But any of these agencies at some point may come to bear on your project as well. I want to just point out to all of you, some of you may know this. If you don't, you just need to know. A few years ago, Mass chapter of APA, American Planning Association, engaged Bob Mitchell and Robert Ritchie to create a guidebook for cities and towns to understand the lay of the land with Massachusetts land use law. It is available on the Mass APA website. If you ever have any question at all that you are trying to understand how a local board works or how the various jurisdiction of different local requirements, that guidebook can just be really, really important, and it's available to anybody to be able to sign on and access. So beyond this training or anything else, sometimes just go. I still go to it as well. It's just a very helpful resource on all things land use. So I want to look at some what I call regulatory basics about some just sort of fundamental things that that you need to know if you're going to try to work on either in a locally sponsored affordable housing development or just working with a developer who's trying to get through the process. Sort of fundamental basics are, if you have a site that you're thinking about doing affordable housing on or want to support affordable housing on, what can that property actually be used for? How much development is allowed on it? Sometimes it's not only the use that you need to know about, but how much. And then what are the procedures that need to be followed? If zoning is anything else, it's process. Does this project need, a building permit or any other sort of project review prior to a building permit? Does it need site plan approval? Does it need a special permit? Does it need a variance? The zoning bylaw or ordinance should tell you that. But don't be afraid to ask questions, because sometimes wading through a zoning bylaw or ordinance can be daunting. Does the project need a comprehensive permit under Chapter 40B? So it's sort of, first of all, like, what can we do with this site? How do we get that to happen? Is it through a zoning path or is it through a comprehensive permit path? It's just very important. And that's true regardless of whether any other local support is involved. You've got to understand how you get a project permitted. For any project, does what you want to do involve demolishing an existing building or structure? Does it involve changes to existing buildings in a local historic district? Is the project subject to a low impact development bylaw? Does the property include wetlands? Will any aspect of the project involve an alteration to within 100 feet of a wetland, within 200 feet of a river? These are all like environmental triggers that are apt to bring you into contact with the Conservation Commission, possibly the Board of Health, possibly the Planning Board. But these are just like checklist questions you need to know. And I would just say, generally, you're going to hear this from me again. If you're in a position where you're thinking about trying to find a site, perhaps existing municipal land or municipal property, you're thinking of buying for the municipality to use for affordable housing development, look for sites that have the fewest environmental constraints, because it's going to increase what you can do and frankly minimize the potential for public disagreements about the suitability of a project. How is my project going to comply with stormwater management? And if your town has a local stormwater management bylaw that could actually have more stringent requirements or more difficult requirements to meet than the state handbook. Are you in a priority habitat area? If you are, then you're going to be dealing with the natural heritage folks. Do you have access to sewer service? If you require on-site sewage treatment and disposal, are you generating more than 10,000 gallons per day of sewage flow? Because if you are, that is going to ramp up the permitting requirements and frankly, the cost of a project, because you're no longer talking about a standard septic system. Do you require access or improvements within a state road? This is another layer of permitting that sometimes happens with bringing you into contact with this, the state government. How many vehicle trips per day will it generate? Is it a brownfield site? Will any aspect of the project trigger a MEPA filing? Now, recently, the Commonwealth has made the sort of MEPA process less daunting for housing development, which really needed to happen. But these are all just sort of things that, depending upon the scale of your project or the location of it, or the particular impacts that it may have, may take you out of the sort of local government realm and into an interaction with state agencies. So these are all like questions you're going to want to ask yourself as you're trying to decide as a community, where might we want to support affordable housing happening in our town or city? Does your project need financial support, such as a community one-stop grant? What public funding sources might this project need beyond something like one-stop? What do those sources require? And in addition to showing that you have site control, do these sources require or give priority to projects with demonstrated local support? That is often the case, folks, and there's a very good reason for it. State agencies that have funding to support development need to move that money. They need to move that money so they can get more. So it's a valid consideration for a state agency that's in the realm of funding projects to take readiness to proceed into account. Do these sources, does the project involve disposition or development of municipally owned land or state-owned property? Certainly, if it involves disposition of municipally owned property, you're going to be into the world of what's called Chapter 30B, which is the Uniform Procurement Act. And that definitely will involve your select board or your mayor or city council, depending upon the organization of your form of government. And so when you ask all these questions about yourself, what are the environmental constraints? What are the types of permits that might be required? Can I get relief from those particular permit obligations or not? If there are things that stand in the way in local regulation that you can't get waived because the board perhaps can't waive it. Don't ask a conservation commission to just waive their regulations because you've got an affordable housing project in mind, because they're not a land use board. They're in the job of protecting wetlands. So you have to really think about, if I can't get everything I need through the local permitting process, then perhaps I need a comprehensive permit under Chapter 40B. And that then opens the door to a whole host of conversations, both locally and with one or more state agencies. So with that, I want to just look at a little more detail about what some of these entities do in hopes of perhaps helping you understand the opportunities and constraints that you may face working with them. So planning board has statutory authority over the subdivision control law, also a process called approval not required, which is a part of the subdivision control law. So anything that involves taking a site and dividing it up into lots, creating a road to serve those lots, the planning board is the entity that's going to handle that, unless it's a comprehensive permit. If it's a comprehensive permit, then the zoning board of appeals will handle the subdivision, but otherwise it is the planning board. There is a planning board in most communities I've worked in handles site plan review. I will certainly acknowledge that that's not the case across the board. How site plan review works could change in the near future. There have been proposals bouncing around for a few years now in the legislature to codify site plan review as part of the Zoning Act, but that has not been the case to date. When you see site plan review, just know that that exists because Massachusetts is a home rule state and communities have been able to create their own site plan review process. Planning boards typically handle this. Sometimes it's another entity, but I'm going to say for the purposes of this presentation, it's the planning board that would handle that function. They are allowed by law, subject to your local zoning bylaw or ordinance. They are allowed to grant special permits for higher density, for open space residential design, for multifamily housing and non-residential districts, et cetera. Almost any type of special permit, the planning board, it can be the special permit granting authority. That depends on what your zoning bylaw says. They also have a unique role in proposals to change zoning. They must hold a public hearing and report with recommendations to town meeting or your municipal council. You know, they have to make a report to the local legislative body before a zoning amendment can be acted upon. So it's really important to work with the planning board if you're looking at a site that you think would be ideal for affordable housing, but the zoning right now doesn't work. And you're trying not to do a comprehensive permit, or perhaps you don't need to if you could just get the zoning change. They have a lot of other responsibilities too. I don't know how many people in this meeting have been on a planning board. I have. It was a wonderful role to have. They also get involved in reviewing plans and report and making recommendations for the formation of historic districts. They have unique and exclusive statutory authority over the creation of a master plan for their community. They may serve as park commissioners. They have authority over laying out of streets to be proposed as public ways. There's a whole process many of you may be familiar with, that before a road can be accepted as a public way, it has to be laid out, and the planning board handles that function. They may have authority to approve street names. I have worked in towns where other entities handle the naming of streets. If there's an application for a Chapter 91 license, which is a waterways license for something like a pier, they have a role in that process as well. They also have a role in reviewing urban renewal plans for consistency with the community's comprehensive plan. So they do a lot of different things, but for the kind of projects that you might be thinking of, it's probably plan review. It could be a special permit. That's typically sort of where they tend to get involved. The Zoning Board of Appeals, also its authority comes from the Zoning Act, and Chapter 40B as well, which is not part of the Zoning Act. They are appointed by the select board or mayor with confirmation from the council. I will just sort of go back and point out that most planning boards are elected, but we do have cities and towns in Massachusetts where the planning board is appointed. So just understanding how people get into the role that they have can be very helpful. Primary functions of a ZBA, which I currently serve on in my town and have since 2008. They grant special permits. They review and act on applications to extend or alter non-conforming uses and structures. They handle variances by state law. They handle appeals from people who are unhappy with the decision of, say, the building inspector. And they also handle comprehensive permits under Chapter 40B. So understanding, like, do I go to the planning board? Do I go to the ZBA? It's going to depend on what your zoning bylaw says. So unfortunately, there's no avenue out of really understanding how your zoning works. But understanding who grants what types of waivers, or who's got authority to grant the various incentives that a housing project may need, it's likely going to be the planning board or the ZBA. So understanding that whoever has that authority, what are the criteria that guide that decision? So you can, if you need to apply or work with the developer to apply for approvals, what are the things that you need to address so the board has the information they need to act on the criteria that they must find on in order to grant approval? Do they also have administrative rules and regulations? Not everything is in a zoning bylaw, and frankly shouldn't be. So something like site plan review, for example, the authority for site plan review will be in the zoning bylaw, but often the rules and regulations around submission requirements and so forth will be in administrative rules and regulations. That's where knowing the planning board's administrative assistant can be key. What are the filing deadlines? There's nothing worse for a board, nothing, I swear to God, than to get to a meeting on a Thursday night and be asked to act on something that was just received in the planning department on Monday, and the board has not had time to review it. So often they have filing deadlines, but even if they don't have specific filing deadlines, it's just a good idea to recognize that people need time to review something. Understanding how busy their docket is. I was on a meeting a couple of nights ago where a board had 7 different applications in front of them, and some of them were really controversial. So that board met for, it was close to 6 hours. What information does the board need in order to make a decision? That should be laid out in their rules and regulations, if not in the zoning bylaw. And do the exceptions or relief that the board can grant require, something that sort of exceeds their authority? Do you need some relief that they can't grant? Some projects require action by both boards. It's just the nature of the beast. Conservation Commission. The source of a Conservation Commission's authority is General Laws 131, Section 40, the Wetlands Protection Act, and the accompanying regulations under 310 CMR 10. There is often, I find most often, a local wetlands bylaw or ordinance that supplements and usually exceeds 131 Section 40. A conservation, so you need to sort of understand both, or at least know that both exist. They may also have a role in reviewing and commenting on applications to the planning board or the zoning board of appeals, such as a zoning. Some towns still have zoning districts for wetlands, even though I think a lot of places have probably eliminated that at this point, but because the Wetlands Protection Act does the job. But if there's a review role under a special permit or something, then Conservation Commission will often be a reviewing body, even if the comment is just, we don't have any comments. Typical requests to a Concom involve request for determination or applicability, an abbreviated notice of resource area determination, a notice of intent, a request for certificate of compliance. Simply stated, what these involve are delineating the limits of a wetland, understanding where the buffer zone is, applying for approval to do work within 100 feet of a wetland, and then at the end of the project, requesting a certificate of compliance that shows the work that was authorized in the notice of intent, in fact, was done in accordance with that permit. They review and approve, projects, through the lens of, our job is to protect wetlands and water resources. Their mission is environmental protection. They may care about housing as much as you do, but when they sit in that role of the Conservation Commission, their job is to protect wetlands. They don't have the authority to approve based on a proposed land use. They don't have authority to waive state or local regulations just because something's an affordable housing development. It's why I constantly try to say to people, look for sites that have the fewest amount of constraints, so that you don't have to ask a board to do something that they really don't have the authority to do. They do have the ability to work with applicants to accomplish both wetlands protection and housing where it's feasible and consistent with their authority. I have seen many conservation commissions work with applicants to think about how might you approach your project a little bit differently, so that the construction you're proposing to do may be less injurious to the wetland that's nearby. And conservation commissions can be very helpful. It's just important to understand the constraints within which they work. A Board of Health draws its authority, its considerable authority, I might say, from General Laws, Chapter 111. They also have a role in the approval of a definitive subdivision plan, being able to confirm that, yes, a septic system is feasible on the lots shown on that plan. So they are responsible at the local level for state Title V, which is subsurface sewage disposal. They have their own regulations to implement that. Their regulations are frequently in excess of state Title V. They may have some additional requirements and a role to play if you have, for example, an aquifer protection district in your zoning. Board of Health often has a role in reviewing applications under that section of your zoning where an applicant may in fact be requesting some relief. And they may have a review and approval authority over conversions to two-family or multifamily dwellings as well. So it's important to understand that Board of Health also has a role in housing code. They review and act on underground storage tank permits. They have a lot of other responsibilities not related to development permitting. I can think of an easy example for any of you who may be joining from the Cape or Islands, that boards of health in that region are increasingly expected to have a role to play in enforcing short-term rental regulations. So boards of health do a lot. They are often asked to review and approve the location of solid waste facilities and large projects. Much like the Conservation Commission's mission to protect the environment, the Board of Health's mission is public health. So much like the Conservation Commission, they don't have authority to approve something because it's a land use. Their lens is public health. They can waive septic system regulations to, they cannot waive septic system regulations just because something is affordable housing. It's just not part of their scope of authority. They may grant some Title V variances if authorized by Title V. I mean, there are some things that a Board of Health can sort of waive, but again, it's always going to be through the lens of public health and safety. A historic district commission draws its authority from Chapter 40C and a local historic district ordinance or bylaw that we have in addition to the historic district commissions that operate under 40C. We have several that operate under what's called a special act of the legislature, and you'll find those in communities such as Bedford, Lexington, Nantucket, and so forth. Those which are named here in this slide. Typical requests to a historic district commission are, here's our project. We need you to tell us that it's okay, that you can grant us a certificate of appropriateness, which means that what can be seen from the street as it relates to a proposed change to a building is appropriate for that district, or a certificate of non-applicability, what the applicant wants to do, really the district commission doesn't need to act on. Or a certificate of hardship, which may be, I'm in a historic district. I simply can't meet the Historic District Commission's guidelines for whatever reason. There's an opportunity to grant a certificate of hardship if the HDC thinks that it's appropriate. But in most cases, what you're going to an HDC for is a certificate of appropriateness. Here's my project. Here's what I want to do. I've designed it in accordance with your guidelines and regulations. Please tell me what I'm doing is appropriate so I can proceed. They may also serve as the city or town historical commission. Sometimes that's the case, sometimes it's not. Sometimes they are two separate bodies. If they are functioning as the historical commission, they may also have a role to play in demolition delay. And demolition delay, for those of you who don't know, is simply a process for delaying the demolition of a structure in order to buy time to see if someone can come in, step in and try to preserve it. Design review boards typically have an advisory role, at least in most communities. Their authority is designed in the local ordinance or bylaw, so it's important to understand if you have a design review board, what does your zoning say about their function? They are often asked to review and comment on multifamily developments, whether the development needs a special permit or site plan review, or even for that matter, a comprehensive permit. The ordinance may set specific design standards, or it may refer to design guidelines. And these are very important things to understand. When there are design standards in your zoning, those are essentially compulsory or mandatory. They must be followed. If they are design guidelines that are adopted kind of outside the zoning bylaw can provide for design guidelines authority, but the guidelines don't have quite the same, I guess I would say, force of law. But they matter. So it's important to understand, are you dealing with standards that must be met? Are you dealing with guidelines that you're going to be expected to meet? And how closely can your project address them? They may have illustrated design guidelines. That's great. Often they don't, but they will typically evaluate a project considering its height, the scale, the facades, the roof shape, massing, and so forth in relation to nearby structures. They may have responsibility in a community that has what's called a large house review bylaw. Large house review is simply you tend to find this in more affluent communities where everything is a very large home. And at some point, the question is this just too large for the neighborhood in which it's proposed? So how can you sort of work from a design perspective in making that very large structure more compatible with what's around it? Community Preservation Committee, as I think many of you probably know, often has a role in supporting affordable housing because it's part of their authority. They provide grants, they can provide loans or rental assistance. Many housing trusts I've worked with really are grateful for the relationship they have with their Community Preservation Committee for providing funding for housing. They sometimes get involved in projects that have more than one purpose. I think some of you may have worked in communities where CPA funds not only accomplished historic preservation, but also a housing benefit. Their funding allocations require approval from town meeting. Affordable Housing Trust draws its authority also from the statute and a local bylaw or ordinance that is adopted to establish the trust. We do still have, I think, some housing trusts around the state that operate under a special act. But regardless, there's usually a local bylaw that sort of establishes the scope of their authority. They are fabulous. They have such broad authority. They can do so many awesome things for housing. They can buy land, they can sell land, they can lease it, they can develop, they can loan money to developers. They are just so important. However, their wings are often clipped by restrictions in the local ordinance or bylaw. So you've got to read the bylaw to understand what has the town or city done to sort of constrain what the trust could do. There's often a big difference between what the statute says they can do and what the local bylaw says. So again, just understanding what your existing regulatory scheme says in your town is important. They get their funds from a variety of sources. CPA is one. It's important. In communities that have inclusionary zoning, there are sometimes fees paid by developers that then go to the housing trust. Fees, what we call fee in lieu. Town meeting appropriations. Nantucket is a town that comes to mind that has really appropriated millions of dollars for the housing trust to do the job, the very difficult job that they have in that community. I can't underscore enough the important role that a housing trust can play in supporting affordable housing in a community. Select board has a role in real property disposition. If you've got municipal land you want to sell for affordable housing, they're going to get involved. They sometimes are involved with special permits and site plan review. The Zoning Act provides for that. It's not common, but just know that that's there. They have a role to play usually in reviewing and approving the affirmative fair housing marketing plan for a project. That also sometimes just gets delegated to the planning department or the housing trust. They have final say over, when town meeting is called, and whether to call a special town meeting at all. So if you've got a site, you want to move forward, and you don't want to wait till next year's annual town meeting, you need to be in consultation with your select board to determine whether they would be willing to call a special for the purpose of handling that project. They appoint the town manager or the town administrator. They usually have a role in hiring, firing town staff, even if it's simply a review period for the town manager's appointments. And they appoint a lot of other boards and commissions, such as the Housing Trust, the Community Preservation Committee, the ZBA, and others. So I'm going to stop here because we have two awesome case studies. So I'm going to not share my screen right now, and I'm going to introduce Matt, who's going to take over from here, and I will be back a little bit later.
Awesome. Thanks, Judi.
Judi.
Should I just jump right in, Katie?
That would be great.
Awesome.
Introduce yourself, though, since Judi's on a first name basis with you, obviously.
Well, that was incredible. And thanks to MHP and Eastern Bank for putting this together. And Judi, that was an incredible overview. Really appreciate it. I feel like I just saw my whole career flash before my I have just one case study that kind of picks apart and builds on pieces of what Judi just described to everybody. And I hope everybody can see my screen, so I'll just flip through a few slides that I have. But before I do that, I'll introduce myself. My name is Matt Zahler. MPZ Development is my firm. I'm an affordable housing developer, and I've been in the business for about 20 years. Started in architecture and engineering and kind of moved to development over the years. MPZ Development has been in existence for about 8 years now, almost 9. And so done a number of projects. I would describe my firm as a boutique affordable housing developer. And I say that because the projects that I do are unique and very pointed, and they fall within a sweet spot of about 50 or so units. And I am one to create public-private partnerships through the work that I do. I primarily focus on taking former town assets and turning them into affordable housing. The project I'm going to share with you today is the Baldwinville School Apartments. You can see a rendering of it there in the background. This is in partnership with another developer, Capstone Communities, and Jason Korb. He actually presented to this group last year another project that we partnered on, and we were successful in creating. This project is currently under construction, so just keep that in mind. We started in April, and we're due to deliver April of last year, and we're due to deliver in October of this year. So a little bit about Templeton and the Baldwinville location. So here's a map. So if you head out on Route 2 to Central Mass, you'll get to Gardner, and then Baldwinville is the next town over. You'll get off Route 2 and you'll hit 202, and you'll end up in the little hamlet of Baldwinville, where we took what was the Baldwinville Elementary School, and we are turning it into housing. Here's a picture of what the school used to look like. This project has been going on for a very long time. I just looked at my notes, and we signed the designation agreement with the town in September of 2020. So this was a COVID project. And so what's here is a site plan to the right, and then the school building to the left. And you can see number 10 on the plan is the school, where we'll have 15 units of housing. And then we're doing a new addition behind the school building with another 39 units of housing for 54 units total, 49 of which will be funded vis-a-vis the low-income housing tax credit program, and a myriad of financing sources, which I'll share at the end of the presentation so you can see what goes into a project like this. Roughly a $40 million investment in the town of Templeton, which is huge for a town of 8,000 people. And I have to say that the community was incredibly supportive of this project. I should also mention it's environmentally green. It's a FIAS construction in the new addition. It's a passive house, for those of you that aren't familiar with the term. And it's also 100% electric, this project. So we're excited about that. So as you can see here, the town went up and above what's typical, and they were very involved with the RFP for this project. So it was a 30B disposition, as Judi mentioned in her presentation. We put in an RFP response. It was our firms and then a cannabis operator that was looking to do this redevelopment. We luckily won the day with affordable housing. And when we made the request, we also asked for a significant amount of CPA to make the project financially feasible. And this community came back with two allocations of CPA, the first for 1.2 million, the second for 750,000, both voted at open town meeting. So that was pretty incredible and supportive of a project like this. They really wanted the housing. They need the housing. There isn't a ton of rental housing in the community. And then they also offered fee reductions as it related to permitting, a reduced purchase price. We did pay for the building. So that was something that also came into play. We did a comprehensive permit here, which made the most sense for the site. It's roughly a 3-acre site. So Concom was involved. We're close to the river. There's another permit that Judi didn't mention, which is called 4054A, this is a former railroad site, which cut through the site. So we had to deal with that. And then but the comprehensive permit made everything much more streamlined. And we had a huge amount of advocacy by the town administrator at the time, as well as the select board, which was very much in favor of the project, and helped us kind of get through process and extended our designation agreement multiple times. So it was really what I would call a public-private partnership in getting to this, the groundbreaking we had in April. So CPC, which is the committee that designates the CPA funding, they were very much involved. Planning board gave design input, but zoning board of appeals was responsible for doing the 40B. This was their first 40B. So were very engaged. We walked them through the process. They understood what they were doing. Again, very supportive. There is a historic commission, so they helped us with the historic tax credits that were put on this project. We used state and federal historic tax credits to renovate the school building. Again, Concom, as I mentioned, there's a development services department in Templeton, which is really pretty much what Judi described. This is the administrative group that helps everybody connect to the various other departments and kind of was the guiding light to kind of help us secure a building permit, comp permit, just have an open line of communication and dialogue with the town. And again, select board, town administrator, super helpful. Some additional things that came about and are interesting as it relates to this development is we not only purchased the school, but then we purchased an adjacent home. And we structured a long purchase and sale with that owner. It was integral to the larger development project because it freed up parking for the project. And so, that was something we looked at saving the building. It was historic, but had been modified so much over time, it really didn't matter. We looked at saving it, but it just was full of environmental issues. And so we took it down and we created additional parking for the project, which was much needed. And we're building a storage facility for attic stock and things that we'll need down the road. And then in the DDA with the town, it was structured with that flexibility that we needed so we could get from A to B. It's been 6 years since we signed that document, and that essentially allowed for all of the things that we needed as it related to support for maintaining the building during the development period. The town, was looking out for our best interests and the interests of the community. And so that was the document we used to drive the change here. And then on top of all of that, the CPA allocation, there was also a community development block grant allocation of $2 million, which redid all of the roadway and street infrastructure around the site and also the surrounding neighborhood. So they got water upgrades, electrical upgrades, new street paving, new sidewalks, ADA compliance. So the town really went all out when they were trying to get this development to happen. And it was super helpful as, all of the affordable housing resources are competitive at the state level. So it made a great case for us to be able to do this project and create rental housing in a community that really didn't have any. And so here you can see just a breakdown of the affordability mix and the incomes and the rents as they relate to the folks that are going to live here. There's also a local preference, which came as part of the comprehensive permit, 70% local preference. So if you live or work in the town of Templeton, you have a priority when it comes to getting into the affordable housing lottery that will happen as a result of this construction. And then again, the site plan to show you, the addition, the historic school building, and then the parking that I mentioned. The house used to be right here where these 4 cars are that we took down to create more parking. This is the storage shed. We have a playground that's open to the public, so it can be accessed, by the walking path that we created, which is also part of the project benefits that go out to an overlook that is abutting. It's an old railroad abutment that gives you a view up and down the Otter River. So it's quite nice. And then other site related amenities. And we have amenities within the building for our residents. So really all around great development. And then the sources of financing. So these projects are hard. There's a lot that goes into them. So it's not just the local piece, but then the state piece and the public-private partnership where we get investors to come in and buy the tax credits and banks to lend. So you can see here 18 sources of financing, both permanent financing, but also operating subsidies to make sure that this project stays solvent and has the ability to be completed and built in the manner that we'd like to see. And we as developers, myself and Jason Korb, we don't ever build anything that we wouldn't live in ourselves. So these are beautiful units. You couldn't distinguish an affordable unit from a market unit, and we do have 5 market rate units here as well. So I'll stop there and I'll turn it over to Shaun. I think that'll work.
Hopefully, one never knows. Can you hear me?
I'm
Yeah.
just going to jump in and say we're getting some fantastic questions about the project. We're going to make sure there's time at the end, and we will bring those forward.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll press ahead and we'll do Q&A after. Excellent. Katie, thank you for inviting me. My name is Shaun Suhoski. I'm the town manager in Athol for about 12 years now. Before that, I worked about a decade in community and economic development in Gardner and in Air during the post-Army base closure. And I've had the pleasure of working with Judi Barrett, and now, gosh, I'm a little nervous having to follow her, but my role here is easy. I get to take you through some slides of a great project in Athol. And Matt, thank you for that presentation. So cool to see our neighbors up here in Route 2 getting some work done in the Baldwinville area. Let's see if I can, well now, let me just share the screen and I was on a roll too, right up until I tried to share the screen. And can anybody see that? Katie, can you see us?
No, but don't
No,
panic.
I'm
Don't
not.
panic. Sometimes you have to put it up there and then click start or something.
But you're not even seeing the.
No.
Huh. Well, this is great. Oh, I have a new menu here. Let's try this. And you
Yeah,
tell me.
don't panic.
You tell me if I try not to panic.
Yay!
This isn't a select board meeting, so I'll stay calm for now.
There we go.
Hey, everybody.
You got that. Best recovery ever.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. A little bit about Athol. If you took the map that Matt showed you and just kept driving west on Route 2, just keep going, you'll end up kind of in a lost area between Gardner and Greenfield. And Athol is it's a mill town built around the Millers River and the Tully River. We're pretty densely built downtown. I'm coming to you from the library, which we're very proud of. We have about 12,000 people, but like any older mill town, we've been around since 1762. Our housing stock, half of it was built before 1939. We've updated our housing production plan just a few years ago. We've reduced a vacant building list that had over 200 properties on it about 10 years ago. And to the best that we can see from windshield survey to, a couple dozen. So there's been a lot of effort in town to utilize the facilities we have. So how did we get to the project we're going to talk about? We have a housing crunch. We have an affordable housing crunch in town, just like the Commonwealth does. And 10 years ago, the town inherited 4 school buildings. And with that, when we inherited those buildings, I had put together a plan for the select board that they endorsed, where one of the buildings would be either leased or sold for a particular purpose. It's a building that's on the school campus, our middle school and the new elementary school campus. That still remains in town ownership. Another building went to the private sector. And these 2 buildings here, they're co-located on contiguous lots. The Riverbend and Ellen Bigelow schools, they look like probably schools in your towns if they were built shortly after 1900. So we have these two buildings on a 3.25 acres of land. And what you'll see is that a couple things on this map. You'll see that it's in a fairly densely developed residential area. It's a couple of blocks from downtown. And on the bottom right of this graphic, you're going to see something labeled School Street Apartments. Those are 50 units on the subsidized housing inventory that were built probably, I lose track of time, but I'll say 15, 16 years ago. It was a while ago. And that's on the site of a former school building as well. So Athol, we had a little bit of goodwill because those School Street buildings are still maintained, they're occupied, they're well maintained. So we had a little bit of that to help us ease into the discussion with the neighborhood about the Ellen Bigelow and Riverbend campus. So with the marching orders from the select board in 2016, Shaun, do something, follow the public procurement, all the processes that Judi Barrett talked about will come into play, even if it's a town-sponsored project. So taking a little bit deeper look into the Ellen Bigelow Riverbend project, we are so fortunate that we had New View Communities as the developer. And I say this all the time, town government does not, we don't create jobs and build an actual business. We are not good at being landlords. Towns, cities and towns, in my experience, most are terrible at being landlords, and we don't directly build housing. What we need is to make an environment that is ripe for investment, and we need to engage with like-minded partners to get that, have their expertise and their ability to actually build things. And in our case, we were able to, after an RFP process, we settled with New View Communities. They're a community development corporation based in Fitchburg that 30 years ago served Fitchburg and Leominster and have expanded. And Athol is at the edge of their territory, and we were very fortunate to work with them. So that's why I want to give a lot of credit. New View is the developer that brought all the resources to bear. The town and the town manager are cheerleaders, and we try to make the process smoother. So on these school buildings, at the end, we have 53 units of housing. It's affordable to a range of income. But a lot of those units are at Section 8 subsidy or at the 60% of the median income. And then we have a few that are at the 80 to 110% of the median income. The beauty of this project was the two school buildings are saved. They're being renovated now in a historically sensitive manner. And there's a new structure that's connecting those buildings that will provide the elevator and will include 20 units, one-bedroom units for seniors. The balance of the units, the other 33, are for families. Part of our RFP process, we favored proposals that would have an on-site presence in terms of management and maintenance. And the property under the structure we have, which goes beyond my understanding, is the property is on the tax rolls as well. So that was a selling point to get people to buy into 53 new units in the neighborhood. And of course, it'll be better maintained, and there'll be green space for the neighborhood as well. I've already talked about the affordability. Matt covered a list. I think there were 18 funding sources, and I had meant to ask Jim Linfield or Mark Doan from New View what our final tally was. But what I'm aware of, all these projects, any project, you got an old municipal building, an old school building, you're going to have historic tax credits. You're going to have low-income housing tax credits. There's permanent financing involved. I have DHCD here, but private housing division, but call it EOHLC and all of their programs. And you probably got 5 bullets under EOHLC, mass housing, other funds. In Athol's case, Congressman McGovern did submit, and the project received $1 million from community project funding, or used to be called earmarks. thank goodness. And the town of Athol Select Board supported it with $400,000 in ARPA funds. All of these things are needed to help make the project more competitive as the developer goes to stack up the financing needed to make it happen. Here's a view from with the buildings and the connecting building, how it would merge in there in the background. And I will say Icon Architecture, who's been on board from the beginning, Janice Mamayak, Bethany Moody, they were great architects to have involved. They engaged with the community. We took community input on some of the design features inside the buildings. We'll just go quickly through this. On the left is a typical of the senior, the new construction. It's a 1-bedroom unit for seniors. On the right is a typical 2-bedroom. Is this one too? This might be a 3-bedroom layout in the Bigelow School, just including them just for your viewing pleasure, but we'll move past that. Here's what I wanted to spend some time on. To make these projects happen, you need so many things to go right, because so few things that go wrong can derail things. So in our case, we started in 2016, and we really got rolling in 2019, but I'll come to that. In 2016, we inherited the buildings. Now we got all these vacant school buildings. Shaun, what are we going to do? We're going to issue a request for proposals. We're going to get right out there. We're going to get ahead of this. We're not going to be one of those towns that has a building vacant for 20 years. Well, that can happen. In this case, in 2016, what happened? There was a change in the administration in Washington, and just timing-wise to our RFP, and I just hadn't considered this when we issued it, there was a period of time where the National Park Service funding, thus the historic tax credits, there were questions and less certainty about how all of that would work. We had 3 nonprofits that we had invited in. One that I had worked with previously, Volunteers of America, Massachusetts. I had worked with them in Air and converted an old hospital to an assisted living facility called Neshoba Park. They were great to work with. They came and viewed the site. HAP Housing, they're out of Western Mass. Now they're called Wayfinders. Again, like-minded, nonprofit. New View Communities, interested in the project in our area. We know their work, but none of those 3 or anybody submitted on that 2016 RFP. So what we did was the plan was, well, we'll hunker down. We'll see how the funding settles out. In 2018, New View approached the town. Hey, would you be interested in partnering in submitting these schools to a design competition? It's an annual competition by the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston, and they use top-notch graduate students from all the prestigious universities in the Boston area, in whether it's architecture, engineering, and I think there were planning folks involved too. And the students in 2018 submitted this project, and I think it was a runner-up for the prize. But what came from that, imagine if you would, we had a handful of enthusiastic kids. These are graduate students, so young adults with smiles on their faces, smart, working on design, meeting with our senior citizens, having meetings here in the library, and engaging the community. And they came up with a 70-unit concept, but they showed that it could work. And they had a design, a vision. They said, we need 70 units to make this work. And I think it was, Judi, you said when you were talking about design review boards, well, it's too big. Isn't every project, it's too big when you first unveil it to any city or town. They're always too big to start. And there was some feedback that it's too big. But that design competition engaged community partners to say, yeah, we can wrap our heads around this. We do need affordable housing. And so using that 2018 planning exercise as a springboard, we redrafted the RFP. We issued again in 2019. New View Communities submitted a proposal. with their team. There's a little picture there. That's Janice and Mark Doan presenting to the select board. And the RFP was awarded to Newview. And they've been our nonprofit partner now for the 6 years, and it will now be open in 2026. One of the buildings is about done, and they expect to lease up in a couple months. But the road to get there, it took all of these steps. Whatever your disposition agreement is for the land or the buildings, ours was called an LDA. That was signed in 2020. We had neighborhood open houses. We engaged in the permitting with Newview before the funding was even obtained. We went through site plan approval with the planning board, went pretty smoothly, and then it went to the zoning board. After several hearings in several months, the zoning board did approve the required variances for the project. So a Eureka Day was on June 9th, 2021. That's why it's in yellow. They put the approved stamp. It was difficult. It was difficult with the zoning board. I think if your community is similar to ours, Judi spoke to appointing authorities. And when you're dealing with all these boards, and we try to communicate within the town, but the zoning boards, they're kind of the keepers of the character of the community. And it took several hearings and attendance by members of their appointing authority, which is the select board, attendance from all the stakeholders that I mentioned previously that were involved in the designing process to give the board a comfort level to issue that zoning relief. And then it was off to the races. It was a slow race from 2021 to 2024 and even into 2025 to line up all the financing. And now this year we're looking, the construction is well advanced. One building is nearly complete, the new construction, and we're expecting to start leasing up in July of 26. So what I would do is I'd leave you with some takeaways on this. The old adage, there's no I in team, engage everybody. And when Judi gave you that rundown of all the boards and committees, and when Matt talked about how Templeton's, whether it's the paid staff, the administrative staff, the permitting staff, or the appointed boards and committees, it takes everybody to become part of that process. Engage the community. Be transparent. Break down barriers or fears of the size of the project or how it will be managed, and you'll move forward. There are processes that need to be followed. I didn't think you wanted me to talk about 30B and the RFQ, RFP process, but there are public procurement. But you can stipulate within those procurement documents what you want. And for these buildings, we wanted project submittals that would preserve the historic character, that would create housing affordable to a range of incomes, that would include green space, that would end up as a taxable entity to the town. And you put that out to the market and let the market respond. But you can tailor that to your community's needs. So be creative, be resilient, educate your boards. Like I have now had probably 9 different members of a 5-member select board, maybe 10 since this project started. And because people get anxious, they feel, oh, zoning was approved. When are they building? Well, they need to get about $25 million together and then they'll build. And just stay the course, build enthusiasm, educate naysayers, use your governing bodies to be ambassadors to the community. That's that's a role that you're whether it's your town manager. In this case, we have a town planner who's doing 5 other projects, right? And so this one ended up with me to cheerlead. But professional planning staff are great at this. Your town administrator, your town planner can work with your select board, keep them fully educated. So now you got, instead of one person talking about the attributes of a project, now you got 5. Now with the planning board, you got 10. Now with the economic development committee. Now you got 15 people, and add the finance committee. Now you have 22 members of the community, plus the other committees, that can help spread the word to their neighbors why this is a good project. So my final, I had this, I used this in a prior presentation. I'm a fan of Galaxy Quest. If you haven't seen it, it's a spoof of Star Trek, I guess, or a parody. Classic. It had Tim Allen and Sigourney Weaver and a great cast in it. And as the commander said, never give up, never surrender. And that's what you have to do for these public projects to come to fruition. So with that, I will see if I can unshare my screen quicker than I shared it, and we'll join the Q&A. Thank you.
That was amazing. I mean, I'm practically in tears. I think Judi has some wrap-up slides, and then hopefully we'll have a few minutes for, there's a lot of specific questions, so we will share your contact information, or we can move that forward.
Be good if I unmute. Can you see my slides?
Yes, that's
Okay. All right. So I'm going to try to keep this brief so we can chat a bit here. I think one of the things that's obvious from the two presenters of the case studies is how important capacity is. And so just some things for you to think about really quickly. I'm going to go through these. Does your community have inclusionary zoning, and is it working? Because if it's not, it's a good idea to take a look at why and fix it. And that's possible to do. Inclusionary zoning should not be stagnant. It has to kind of ride with the market. Also thinking about where do you encourage a mix of different types of housing? It is much harder to create affordable housing when everything is like sort of just a single family district. So thinking about where you might provide for multifamily housing at a realistic density in your neighborhoods or town centers. And if you don't, then that's probably where you're going to need to rely on something like a comprehensive permit to get a project approved. If you have public transportation in your community, do you encourage housing near it? Or as I think the case studies indicated, sometimes you can work with the regional transit authority to sort of make sure you're serving a project that the community has supported. What does your master plan say, or your neighborhood plans about opportunities to develop affordable housing? More often than not, folks, when I look at master plans, there's nothing in there about where it would be appropriate to support higher density housing so you can create affordability. That is part of the job of a master plan, and it's an important thing to keep in mind. Do your boards and committees actually work together to develop your 5-year capital plan? Or is it simply something that's done by the finance department and the town manager? Because everybody who has a role in housing also could be involved in that too, from a housing partnership or housing trust to your economic development people, really having a conversation about where do we put our capital investments in this community to support affordable housing. Has your town funded a municipal housing director or coordinator or regional housing coordinator shared with nearby towns? I neglected to point out in the previous slides on who does what, that many of your communities do have a housing coordinator or housing director who really can play a critical role. And if you don't have one, I can guarantee you it's harder because that person becomes the in-house expert on how to get these things done. Do you have data? Sometimes just being able to build public support in the community is being able to show people a picture of what your town is. So here are like the wage levels. Here's the kinds of jobs that we have in the community. What can people who work on these jobs actually afford for housing? And then you compare that to what the actual cost of housing in the community, and it's kind of an eye-opener. Have you looked at the potential for fair housing implications in your zoning, to the extent that perhaps zoning that's very restrictive may in fact make it more difficult for people to buy or rent in your community, and that may have a disproportionate impact on people of color. So that's a very important piece of how do we then diagnose and respond to and build the capacity to address those kinds of constraints. CPA, does it work with the Affordable Housing Trust? In some communities, that relationship is great. In some communities, it's not. It's something to work on if it's a rocky relationship. Do you automatically transfer your CPA housing funds to the Affordable Housing Trust and let the trust figure out how to invest those dollars? Do you make non-CPA funds available for affordable housing development? I had mentioned Nantucket earlier. There are other communities on the Cape that have really done a lot to try to create affordable housing with their own general fund and other revenues, not just housing trust funds. Have you done a municipal land study? Sometimes communities have property that they don't even realize they could make available for housing. A closed school is kind of an obvious one, but there are pockets of land around that could be made available for affordable housing development, even if it's sort of a scattered site, single family, two family type of development pattern. It's creating housing. Do you pay for training every year? And this just reminds me, the Citizen Planner Training Collaborative Conference is coming up in a week. And that is an ideal place and a very affordable place to get your planning board, ZBAs, and others trained, in addition to participating in trainings like this one. Thinking about who's at your hearings, I can simply tell you, as a board member, I have watched people on my own board flinch when the opposition stands up in the room and opposes a comprehensive permit development. So thinking about, as part of capacity to get housing built, how do you build that public support in the community so there are people at the hearing who can help the board make the right decision, and they're not just hearing from someone who's simply screaming at them because someone doesn't want the project. So capacity building goes beyond what happens inside town hall and goes out into the community as well. And I think with that, we've shared everything we can with you today. And I think what I'd probably do is turn this back over to Katie and Shelley, and you guys take it from there.
That was an amazing session. Really great. And I wanted to just go through some of the questions I've noticed Matt's been answering, but I am going to start while this is fresh on our mind. Judi, quick question about the CPC Affordable Housing Trust relationship and how that can work in terms of getting funding into the affordable housing pipeline, or how that works.
Yeah, it's good that you should ask, because I'm actually going to a meeting after this in a town where this is an issue. So as I think any of you know who've worked with CPA, there has to be at least a 10% set aside for housing. Many community preservation committees put a lot more of that than the 10%. But what often is persuasive to a CPC to do that is a proposal or request from a housing trust fund with specific ideas in mind about what they want to do with the funding. So building up just rapport between those two entities is really important, so that the CPC, as they're receiving requests from other valid, public interest projects, that they also understand how important affordable housing is. Having a plan as a housing trust for what you want to do, having a loan fund management plan, so you're actually making decisions about how much do we want to invest this year in certain types of projects versus holding funding in reserve. Those are all decisions that a housing trust fund really should be making as trustees and stewards of a housing fund. And when you've done that, it actually makes it possible to have a more persuasive relationship with a CPC. So I think the more the CPC can kind of provide the money to the trust and let the trust figure out how to drive the investment of those dollars, the better. What I think is not so great is when the CPC is trying to do housing and the housing trust is trying to do housing. And sometimes that's very hard to coordinate. So building up the capacity of your housing trust and the credibility of the trust to take CPC resources and invest them is just really the best way to go.
Yeah, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that MHP's technical assistance team has a really active program for affordable housing trust run by Shelley Gehring on this call. So, that's a great place to start.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to sort of consolidate a bunch of these comments to Shaun and Matt. The cost per unit cost and what we're seeing in pricing over the last decade. I just think this is a really important conversation to have with this group, because I feel like it's such an eye-opener right now. There was a related question in here about how much does once you get this all built, how much does that pay back the developer, so in other words, is this a profit center? Is this a money-making thing? So with those two comments in mind, just sort of really putting a pin in what we're dealing with right now relative to costs.
Yeah, I can start, and I know Shaun probably has thoughts here as well. I mean, look, these projects take a long time. They're really expensive because they're extremely high quality. And, we as the developer are on the hook for the foreseeable future, a minimum of 15 years, if not longer. So we have to build up adequate reserves to make sure these properties can be maintained. Again, high quality material. And then on top of that, we have operating subsidies that we seek. As Shaun mentioned when he was describing Athol, we also have MRVP, Section 8, AHVP, so lots of different types of vouchers which are necessary in these communities. And the rub is that affordable housing is expensive because it takes time, and time is money, and you have a lot of consultants involved in these transactions with fees and things that just everybody has to be paid for their time, and so that's a lot of what goes into the fundraising effort. And the state is a great partner in all of this, and I can't say enough good things about EOHLC and Kate Racer and her staff and the secretariat. We have a housing secretariat now, which is the first time we've had that in a long time. I think Tukakis was the last time. I don't remember, but anyway, I think that my point that I'm trying to make is everybody's got to come to the table. That's what happens in these collaborations, and that's where you see successful affordable housing projects happen. And I can't say enough good things about the town of Templeton. Shaun, I kick it to you to maybe add or expand on what I said.
I think actually it's great that we heard from you, Matt, hear the developer's side of that. But a couple of the questions, and Katie, I think you were alluding to this, relate to do the cities and towns do economic studies before you embark on a project like this? Is there a cost to the town? And in this case in Athol, we did not undertake that. We were responding to a recognized community need. There was no housing available. There was the dwell time of units for sale was 0 day, 1 day above asking offers. The rental market was filled, and it's still a challenge. So ours was a true housing project. We didn't look into, 9 units are 3-bedroom, so we could get 9 more kids at the school. I think this is where maybe the questioner was going. And, at scale, you need to be aware of that. But we also have a housing production plan. And as we, everything feeds into everything else. And you peel one layer, there's another layer. So what I can tell you, I guess, for the project in Athol is from what we've seen, the impact will be absorbed into our routine operations as a town. It's already in a residential neighborhood. We already have 24/7 police and fire. The schools are near capacity. They already were, and we're in a feasibility study phase for our high school, but we would be anyway. So you can't ignore those things, but don't let them, the fear of the unknown. You don't want to not do anything. Every community is different, but that was our case.
I am trying to be mindful of time here, and I do have a few. This was an amazing session. I'm so excited. And thank you for all of you who showed up today. And thank you so much, Shaun, Matt, and Judi, for an amazing session. I want to remind everyone here that we have 2 more sessions in this series on March 18th and March 25th. The first is going to be on the municipal role in affordable housing development. March 25th is going to be talking about building local support, which is so critically important. And I think with that, we're it. Please join us. Also, you can see now that the evaluation form is going to pop up, and please fill that out. And log in your CM credits. And we are gonna, unless we have 2 minutes. Judi, did you want to say a concluding remark?
Yes, just on the fiscal impact point,
Yes.
we need to be careful that we're not making housing policy decisions based on who's going to live in the housing.
Right.
The housing
Yeah.
need is what should be driving this conversation. And that's where you need to build capacity to address what your community is missing and who can't live in your community without that support.
Great final words. So with that, we are done. And thank you again, everyone. The fantastic questions, fantastic speakers. So thank you so much.
Take care.